Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Proverbs chapter 14. So we're going to get right to it as we hear these spoken words of wisdom. All right, so chapter 14, verse 1 says, "Every wise woman builds her house, but a foolish one tears it down with her own hands." So true. Now, he puts, notice too, and again, this is the mindset of the times. Women did not have equal status with men, the product of Eve's sin. Okay, so that you go back to, that's where it starts. So that's why it pretty much says every wise woman builds her house, because the woman was the primary caretaker of the house. The men basically sat in the city gates, chewed the fat, took care of city government. But the women were the ones who built the homes, took care of the homes. They were the housekeepers. They ruled the house in that respect. Men did not really care. He just came home, ate, whatever. He didn't care about design and all that kind of stuff. Now, he says that every wise woman builds her house, then, for that matter. Then, in other words, a woman with wisdom would build her house, but a foolish one would tear it down. Verse 2, "Whoever lives with integrity fears the Lord, but the one who is devious in his ways despises him. The proud speech of a fool brings a rod of discipline, but the lips of the wise protect them." We talked about the rod in chapter 13. I'm not going to belabor it here. I will wait for another one. But notice the term rod, again, there are two applications to this word rod. It is the actual rod. In fact, I think if you think about one of the more, within the last few years, North Korea, I believe, employed this. It's called caning, and American citizen was caned. By the way, this is kind of a good example of this, because this young college student went to North Korea, of all places, and um, this he did something foolish, and then he ended up going to jail. But then one of the things that too, where they had this public display where they caned him. They still do that, like in North Korea. But it said the rod, it was a disciplinary measure, but it was used with a actual rod. Again, we would call it caning. But his foolishness is what got him into that, being a stone fool. Now, like I say, in another case, there was one who actually went and started tearing down pictures of the leader of North Korea. He ended up going to jail, and it actually ended up dying. But again, foolish acts. The Americans who think they are in America, when they go to some of these countries ruled by dictators. Enough said on that. Verse 4, "Where there is no oxen, the feeding trough is empty. But the abundance of harvest, but an abundance of harvest comes through the strength of an ox." Okay, got to appreciate that if you're a farmer. Verse 5, "An honest witness does not deceive, but a dishonest witness utter lies." By the way, we have that all the time. "A mocker seeks wisdom and doesn't find it, but knowledge comes easily to the perceptive. Stay away from a foolish man. You will gain no knowledge from his speech." Oh boy, I could apply that to some government officials. Enough said. Also, just a lot of foolish people. Notice this: stay away from a foolish man. You will gain no knowledge from his speech. Verse 8, "A sensible man's wisdom is to consider his ways, but the stupidity of fools deceive him." Fools mock. Fools mock at making restitution, but there is goodwill among the upright. Now notice, it's funny that he called those who do not want to make restitution fools. A lot of ways I can go there. Verse 10. The heart knows its own bitterness, and no outsider shares in its joy. The house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will stand. The way this seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Now, that's a foolish person. Notice when he says there is a way that seems right to a man, but he doesn't realize the way in its end it is death. There are a lot of people who think they are right, and they're just dead wrong, pun intended. Verse 13. Even in laughter a heart may be sad, and joy may end in grief. The disloyal one will get what his conduct deserves, and a good man what his deeds deserve. Now again, remember these proverbs are any kind of statements in scriptures that's in a sense general. In other words, they don't apply in every situation. And certainly a statement like this is true. Every word of God is true. But he is not saying that it applies in every circumstance, because we know that good people certainly don't always get what they deserve. Verse 15, the inexperienced one believes anything, but the sensible one watches his steps. So true. I keep saying this because in my mind, certain things that's playing out in our culture where this is so true. People just believe anything. Anything. A person can simply say fake news and watch this, they believe it, okay? Hint, hint. Verse 16. A wise man is cautious and turns from evil, but a fool is easily angered and is careless. So again, when you become wise, you're going to get to a place. And again, this wisdom doesn't mean that you're the epitome of a philosopher. But just again, when certain things in life, people say that a wise man is cautious, and then what? He turns from evil, won't go down that path. Verse 17, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man who schemes is hated. Notice this, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. I said this in chapter 13, how road rage, think about just road rage. Think about domestic, right, arguments, how quick-tempered. All of these things, like I say, there's so many applications to this. It's hard to not want to just explore them all. But again, the statement itself stands alone. A quick-tempered man acts foolishly. Some end up dead. Some end up in jail. Some end up in divorce. Some end up broke. We can go on and on and on. Verse 18. The inexperienced. Oh, I gotta say this. Think about some of these basketball players, sports players. Let me, because it's more than just basketball. Sports, quick-tempered in their careers, actors in their careers. We can go on. All right. Verse 18: the inexperienced inherit foolishness, but the sensible are crowned with knowledge. The evil bow before those who are good, the wicked at the gates of the righteous. Again, not always true. In other words, it's not meant, but it does happen. Okay. But we also see a lot where it doesn't happen. Verse 20, a poor man is hated even by his neighbor, but there are many who love the rich. That is so true. Let me just again, I can say there's so many applications to these words of wisdom here. Think about this. Just think about the homeless situation right now, how they're hated. And yet people love the rich who will not do them good. The rich who will do more harm. A lot of times the rich could be the cause of the poor when they close down plants, lay off people for profit's sake. Verse 21, the one who despises his neighbor's sins, but whoever shows kindness to the poor will be happy. Don't those who plan evil go astray, but those who plan good find loyalty and faithfulness? There is profit in all hard work, but endless talk leads only to poverty. The crown of the wise is their wealth, but the foolishness of fools produce foolishness. All right? The truthful witness rescue lives, but the one who utter lies, the truthful witness rescue lives, but the one who utter lies is deceitful. The fear of the Lord is in the fear of the Lord one has strong confidence, and his children have a refuge. The fear of the Lord, the fountain of life, turning people away from the snares of death. Snares of death. A large population is a king's splendor, excuse me, but a shortage of people is a ruler's devastation. In other words, the more people, the more glory, the more splendor. We see that in churches. The larger the church congregation, the more esteem the pastor has. Verse 29, a patient person shows great understanding, but a quick-tempered one promotes foolishness. The tranquil heart is life to the body, but jealousy is rottenness to the bones. Now, there's a lot to be said about jealousy. Jealousy is one of these uncontrolled rages. It leads to a lot of ruin of people. Verse 31. The one who oppresses the poor person insults his maker, but the one who is kind to the needy honors him. Now, you see a lot of statements made to being kind to the poor. Contrast that to how sometimes people look at, for example, the homeless. There's a lot to be said about that. We will address it in one of the statements as far as the poor is concerned. In other words, there are two sides to it. What he's talking about here is just being kind to people who are poor. In other words, don't judge them why they're poor. That's kind of irrelevant at the point they're poor. Verse 32, the wicked one is thrown down by his own sin, but the righteous one has a refuge in his death. Wisdom resides in the heart of the discerning. She is known, even among fools. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. A king favors a wise servant, but his anger falls on the disgraceful one. Now, I was going to try to do number 15, but I have to go back and answer. I'm going to go back in verse 34 and 35. One, a king favors a wise servant. Now, again, remember, these are words of wisdom here. And then they are words of wisdom in a general sense. However, if you wanted to do what people do and say, let's extract principles. One, the term servant, and then you can say, well, let's make it a employee. But notice he says a king, right? And then, or a boss, or, employer. Favors a wise servant. That is true. And the way that can be translated is that if you're making people money, preserving the business, okay, that's why it says the king favors a wise servant. And I'll say this too, barring not our general state of economy, because sometimes when layoffs happen, they happen to both good and bad. But outside of that, job security. A wise servant, you can say, is job security. But I want to look at verse 34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. Now, you're having this thought right now raging in our culture today. One of the thoughts is, you can almost say, Christian nationalism, or the ideal that America is a Christian nation. Now, some will say America is a Christian nation that's slipping away. But the principle itself here says righteousness exalts a nation. So you think about nations that are righteous and, let's say, are following in a right path, they're prosperous nations. Now think about nations that are not. Notice he said sin is a disgrace to the people. I'll get to the sin in a moment, but think about nations, and it always amazes me. Like Russia is not, when you would think Russia certainly is one where sin is disgraced. Like it's leader right now. Look at North Korea. You look at North Korea. I'm always amazed that if I'm the leader there and I'm looking at, you go on Google Maps, I think you can probably find this picture where you see North and South Korea. And almost immediately you can see where the dividing line is, because South Korea is a prosperous nation. They do okay. I'll say this about South Korea. America and South Korea reported their first case of COVID. Okay, on the same day. The first reported case of COVID. South Korea and North Korea reported on the first day. Now, look at the outcomes. Righteousness, not, and sin. Righteousness, food. Wise a fool. Nation fared better, ours didn't. North Korea, look at the map. You see how it's lit up, and then North Korea is practically dark. What I kind of amazed mostly about that to me is how, if I'm the leader, I think myself, how come our nation not like that? But of course, a lot of them are fools. A lot of them are sinful, evil people. That's why. Now, as far as our nation is concerned, we are sliding more and more. Okay? We are sliding more and more away from, let's say, our Christian thought. America was never a Christian nation, but there were certain Christian principles, without a doubt, that guided us. Slavery, of course, is the sin they certainly would like. Slavery is like when David committed his adultery. You'd be like, oh man, I wish I didn't have to talk about that, right? Yeah, David was a great king. Yeah, he was a great king. He was a perfect king if you didn't count the Bathsheba incident. America, a great nation if you don't count its 400 years of slavery. Slavery and Jim Crow. Okay, but for the most part, still, because of the Constitution is why slavery was able to be abolished. And that's despite the people who wrote the Constitution, okay? So when you look at a nation where sin begins to thrive, notice he said, it is this disgrace. It is also the ruin. But notice, righteousness exalts a nation. Now be very careful about how you attach that to America. America's rise to power in and of itself was not because of its righteousness. I'll just leave it at that, because you could begin to. America primarily rise to power. They got bigger bombs. Okay. And I will say that part of America's exaltation as well was because of that they did have righteous laws, righteous principles. Okay, there are some problems depending on who's in authority. But anyway, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is disgrace to any people. So that if a nation, any nation, by the way, was just trying to seek that principle, it would be a good nation. And there are some today who are like that. Now, I'll say this, don't have one sin. So a lot of times what today is going on is you have Christians who focus on one sin or one set of sins, but they don't focus on the other part of sins. And okay. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you ever thought a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. See you in the next study.